Madam Web is a superhero movie that barely anyone knows about, and the people who are aware of it don't care at all. It's not that surprising when you consider how unknown most of these characters are to the general audience, and the fact that real fans see right through Sony's cheap attempt to add female Spider-Man knockoffs in order to boost their image in the eyes of Twitter weirdos. These characters were nothing more than tokenized nonsense in the comics, and being on the big screen doesn't change that at all.
Whatever you're selling, I ain't buying, okay?
The more we hear about this movie, the more it makes you realize Sony wants their own MCU more than DC ever did. Apparently the people working on this movie thought Andrew Garfield would be their Spider-Man, and considering he's my favorite, I'm not really sure how to feel about that. On the one hand, it would be great to see him back in the costume, but on the other hand, I don't want his return to be in some crappy universe like this.
The only power I have is that I believe we can do better.
So by that logic, this movie was originally set in the 90s, and they had references to that era included in the movie. Andrew wasn't set to appear in this because again, it was in the 90s and the plot revolves around Spider-Man's pregnant mom, but it was supposed to be in his universe. Then in a move that would make DC look like expert planners, Sony just decided to set the movie in Tom Holland's timeline.
That is the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
That meant they had to go through and reshoot every scene that had any sort of reference to what year it was, because obviously the MCU Spider-Man's young age changed the whole movie's setting. Again, who even cares at this point because the multiverse lets them screw with time however they want. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where any of this is set or what year it takes place because nobody is going to watch this crap, and the people who do watch it will instantly forget about it.
It was awful.
As if that wasn't bad enough, then the director came out to complicate things further. According to her, this movie doesn't take place within the MCU, and it also doesn't take place within Sony's Venom universe, aka the Spider-Man without a Spider-Man universe. This movie is set in its own world, which just makes this whole situation fucking hilarious. These guys really have no idea what they're doing and it shows. God knows how much money they added to this movie's budget with all those reshoots that they eventually just made pointless by setting it in its own world.
Is this a joke? Is this a joke?
As if all that will they won't they crap wasn't bad enough, then you have this bullshit. I can't even begin to imagine the narcissism and ego these people have to change one of the most iconic, selfless phrases in the superhero genre into some weird, awkwardly phrased, empowering battle cry. God forbid we imply that being given a great power means you have a responsibility to use it to help people, or have the characters learn a lesson through hardship. No, we'd much rather focus on self-validation and having these strong girl bosses realize that the power has always been inside them, they just had to realize how amazing they already were.
Don't ask questions, just consume product and then get excited for next product.
Honestly, this whole thing is a mess. How anyone at Sony thought this was a good idea is beyond me. The entire idea of a universe without Spider-Man makes no sense. It barely worked for a highly popular character like Venom, and it definitely won't work for nobodies like these chicks. Getting people to care doesn't even solve the problem, because if they care enough to watch this, they'll just realize how fucking terrible it is. A movie where 4 strong female characters have to save Spider-Man's pregnant mom sounds awful. Not to mention the fact that everything Spider-Man ever does now can be attributed to some girl bosses that were shoehorned into the story, because he wouldn't exist without them saving his life when he wasn't even born yet.
You serious?
This movie obviously went into development a while ago in 2019 when superhero movies could do no wrong. At that time, this type of agenda-based nonsense was overshadowed by the mass appeal of big events like Infinity War and Endgame. But now that people aren't blinded by big flashy fights, they're not interested in these shitty movies. You really can't blame them for not caring. People only saw these kinds of movies because they felt like they would be missing out on the next big team-up movie if they didn't. When you remove that incentive, people aren't going to waste time or money just to sit through 2 hours of The Message.
I guess I just don't care.
Out of all the superhero movies that feel unnecessary, Madam Web is near the top of that list. It's a story that's trying to build on the idea of a live-action Spider-Man multiverse, and after No Way Home, it's not hard to see why that would interest Sony. The problem is that every decision they make about this movie brings it closer to becoming a Spider-Man fan's worst nightmare. Whether that's because they sidelined Spider-Man or because of the weirdly selfish spin they're trying to put on iconic ideas, fans aren't going to show up to watch a bunch of women in shitty CW costumes pretend to be Spider-Man.